And welcome back to the show. I'm the host of Frontline Voices, Rebecca Miles. We're joined now by Andy Worthington, investigative journalist, authority on Guantanamo and the, in quotes, war on terror, and co-founder of Close Guantanamo, who's joining us from England. Hello, Andy.
Hi there. How are you doing?
I'm all right. So, I wanted to sort of take the clock back a little bit to before invading Iraq. The Bush administration established the Guantanamo Bay detention camp on the coast of Cuba, a United States military prison established in 2002 to hold alleged terrorism suspects and, in quotes, illegal enemy combatants during the, in quotes, war on terror following the September 11th attacks on the US. As of January 2025, at least 780 people from 48 countries have been detained at the camp since its creation, of whom 756 have been released or transferred to other detention facilities or countries. 9 have died in custody and 15 remain. Andy, you're an investigative reporter who was able to use the WikiLeaks Guantanamo files to identify many of those people held at the military prison. And in time, that work was helpful in leading to the release of many of the detainees, the majority of whom had nothing to do with terrorism. I'm curious to know what you think about the current abductions, renditions of immigrants in the US, some green card holders, some American citizens, and whether you're drawing parallels with your understanding about the people, men and teenagers, who were renditioned, some tortured, some sent to Guantanamo, where they were also further tortured, whether you're drawing any parallels.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Rebecca. I'm drawing some rather chilling parallels and some cynical ones. The cynicism came when, Trump came into office promising a war on migrants and has tried to establish that there is actually a war going on, which there clearly isn't. But that's a pretext for him to act as though the normal rules don't apply, which, of course, was the situation after 9/11 when Guantanamo was established. Now, he'd been in office for just over a week when he seemingly surprised everyone by saying that he was going to expand an existing migrant detention facility at Guantanamo. And this is not the war on terror prison. This is a migrant detention facility that had been used from the 1990s to intercept migrants at sea before they could land on the US mainland and claim asylum. It was mainly used for people from Cuba and Haiti in those years. And there were tens of thousands of people held in the 1990s, but its use has dwindled ever since. There's never been more than a couple of dozen people held there. But the facility has remained open. So he ordered the military and the Department of Homeland Security to expand this facility. And as I'm sure everyone knows, he subsequently sent migrants there, nearly 400 in total, and it seems to have stopped as a program, but I'll get to that in a bit. What he did when he sent the first people there who were Venezuelans was that the order went round the whole of the administration to refer to these people as the worst of the worst. That was an explicit echo of the words that were used by Donald Rumsfeld to describe the prisoners who were sent to Guantanamo. And that was obviously done very deliberately. What he then did was that although he held some of these men in the migrant detention center, he also put some of them in the war on terror prison. And this was deeply shocking and also illegal. It was one of the camps, so that, there are a number of cell blocks, I'm sure people know, at Guantanamo, but there are only 2 that are being used anymore. One is Camp 5, which is where all of the supposed high-value detainees are held. And Camp 6 is the one where the low-value detainees are held. In other words, the people that they've never charged and have nothing against. And there are still a few of those men there. And there were 3 of these men who were unceremoniously shunted from Camp 6 into Camp 5 so that Trump could put Venezuelan migrants into Camp 6 of Guantanamo. Now, all of the legal basis for the establishment of Guantanamo is that it was solely for people who were detained in connection with the war on terror, in connection with the 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, associated forces. So it was essentially illegal for him to move anyone else into the prison. But, we didn't hear that much about that. And I have to say that, apart from my reporting on it, nobody seems to have touched on the issue of the 3 low-value detainees who were moved into Camp 5 with the high-value detainees. And the reason this is significant is that successive U.S. administrations had spent 18 years insisting that the national security of the United States would be gravely threatened if low-value detainees at Guantanamo were allowed to be in proximity at all with the high-value detainees, the men who passed through the CIA black sites and were horribly tortured. So, that was the obvious parallel from the beginning. If you want me to now move on to what's happened since Rebecca, what I think is significant is that he obviously faced pushback in the courts about Guantanamo and then lost interest. I hope that we've more or less seen an end to his use of Guantanamo, but that's only for an even more shocking reason, and that's because of his deal with President Bukele in El Salvador, whereby he came up with what seemed like the most fantastic idea of all, that there was a mega-Guantanamo in El Salvador with a capacity of 40,000, a prison where people are explicitly seized and taken to without any form of due process because of a national emergency that Bukele initiated 3 years ago in an attempt to suppress gang activity in El Salvador. So they're brought there without any form of due process, without ever being charged with anything. There is no charging them or trying them or anything. And the intention is that they will be held there for the rest of their lives, that none of them will ever be released. So the echoes there with Guantanamo are phenomenal. And I have to say, I think it needs to be taken on board by people. The reason that Bukele was able to establish this horrendous facility in the first place was because it was what the United States had done at Guantanamo 20 years before. So I think the poison that emanates from Guantanamo is not only alarming in and of itself, but we're now seeing how it actually directly affected truly brutal, punitive, and lawless policies in other countries.
And what ways do you think the treatment of detainees at Guantanamo Bay Prison have shaped public perception and policy regarding immigrants today? I'm
not quite sure what you mean by that in terms of how the American people feel about Trump's war on migrants.
Well, there was a period where all of this was happening, but we didn't know too much until, of course, the Guantanamo files were released, and then the horror of it started to rear its head, right? Like, the rendition. Now we have this almost covert. We have photographs. We have the head of the Department of Homeland Security going and being photographed in front of the prisoners, where before this was very overt, secretive. Now that it's on the front page of the newspaper, and I'm just wondering about how, the horror of what the Bush administration done was documented in, the CIA torture reports. Obama admitting we tortured some folks. But here we are in barely, 10 years. It's happening all over again, and this is very overt, but there seems to be very little way in which there is any pushback. I think
pushback is one thing, Rebecca. I think what the noticeable difference between then and now is that the Bush administration was rounding people up, largely in Pakistan, some in Afghanistan, bringing them to Guantanamo without telling the world who it was holding. And it was extremely difficult for people to find out who they were.
Yes.
A lot of that process took years. The difference here is that from the moment that Trump decided to send Venezuelan migrants to Guantanamo, and then the Department of Homeland Security published photos proudly declaring their achievements with all those hyperbolic scaremongering words that they use about these poor hapless men. Their family members immediately were able to identify them and were immediately able to get in touch with US journalists to say, my son, my husband, my brother is not a gang member as alleged. And would you like to hear my detailed story about why he isn't a gang member? And so immediately people were able to find out that actually the Trump administration was lying. And that was, that was much, much more difficult in terms of Guantanamo. And I think that's the situation that they're in now. On the one hand, they're publicly undertaking acts of performative cruelty to appeal to their base. So, Kristi Noem going to the CECOT prison and, for a photo opportunity was horrific. And it will play well with the administration's most hardline supporters, I'm sure. But I'm not sure that this very public demonstration of their belligerent claimed right to declare that anyone they think is a terrorist, a gang member, and can be sent to a foreign country to be imprisoned in a shockingly lawless facility is playing that well with the majority of Americans, I would say.
Right. And if we can now turn to what your take is on the arrest of green card holders, citizens. We are, and then they're sent to third states, second states, held in immigration detention facilities. What's your take on that's happening currently?
Well, I mean, of course, that's also truly horrific. I mean, everybody outside the United States knows that one of the great principles of liberty in the United States, and all too often claims of liberty and freedom within the United States ring hollow because they're part of a propaganda machine designed to disguise the horrors of empire. The First Amendment and its right to protect freedom of speech is really pretty fundamental. And it is important for all of us who live in Western countries to remember that at least until October the 7th, 2023, we were allowed in general to criticize our governments, to have genuine freedom of speech without thinking that what was going to happen was that we were going to be seized on a street in daytime by masked people and taken to a detention facility and attempted to be deported. So it's absolutely grotesque what's been happening. And this, whereas the deportation program for migrants is very explicitly racist, most particularly towards Central and South America, this is the targeting of people, not always, but quite often with Palestinian connections, whose only crime is that they've dared to speak out in support of the people of Palestine, to say that they shouldn't be being mass murdered by Israel, and to have criticized the actions of the government of Israel. And I mean, this has been a long time coming. I mean, the Israelis have spent a long time persuading Western governments to pass legislation and to introduce rules, insisting that any criticism of the actions of the government of Israel is anti-Semitism. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. But, what's happened under Trump is that starting with Mahmoud Khalil and now involving many, many other people, the administration has indeed been kidnapping people, taking them to ICE detention facilities and seeking to deport them for them having non-violently expressed their right to speak freely in the United States. And just as an aside for a moment, because I'm wondering who's going to pick up on this and use it politically, You are still allowed in the United States to publicly criticize the United States government. You just aren't allowed to criticize the government of Israel. This is demonstrating very, very clearly, more clearly in the United States than in most other Western countries, but it's, elements of this are the same everywhere. That all of these countries, my country included, the UK, is now working for the state of Israel. We are no longer autonomous countries. We are actually working directly for the benefit of the state of Israel. And that's kind of mind-boggling, I think.
And there have been repressions in the UK, right? There is an attempt to silence speech. People have been stopped at airports, had their phones confiscated. Homes have been raided. Can you talk a little bit about what's been happening there?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a handful of examples here, obviously, and and all of those are deeply troubling, of course. And there seem to be a particular period, and it seems to be coming out now that the Starmer government was actually working directly with the government of Israel to try and suppress protest about the genocide in the UK. This involved very heavy-handed attempts to criminalize people who were protesting on the marches that have been taking place in support of the Palestinians ever since October 2023. And that was the point at which a number of journalists started to find themselves being harassed, having their homes raided, and all of this. The difference within the UK is that although this is clearly a desire of the Starmer government, which is who's most of the cabinet members and the prime minister are all members of Labour Friends of Israel, so they are all committed Zionists. Although they would love nothing more than to do what Trump's doing, the real kind of outlier. Maybe I should include Germany as an exception here, is the United States, where Trump has gone ballistic in his efforts to obey the people who are paying him, to absolutely suppress freedom of speech and deport people for criticizing Israel. I mentioned Germany because Germany has taken a much more hardline approach than any other country in Europe. Recently, I'm sure you saw the story as well, that they were planning to deport a number of people who were legal residents in Germany for the same invented crimes that the Trump administration is now implementing in relation to all of these students.
Well, I didn't see that. What was that about?
Well, it's just people who have been supportive of Palestine in Germany. There were 4 people, 2 of them were Irish. I can't remember the nationalities of the other. The German government was going to deport them simply on the basis that they'd expressed public support for the right of people not to be subjected to a genocide. That's the state. Yes. That's the state of Germany as well as the state of America currently.
Yeah. All right, Andy, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's good news that I've just heard, Rebecca, that Mohsen Madawi, who was one of the Columbia students who was apprehended by Trump, has just been ordered released by a judge. So this is up in Vermont, and this is interesting about, you did mention about where they're moving people to. And they've been doing the same thing, obviously, with the deportations of Central and South American people. They're trying to get them into courts that are in the southern states, where they'll find judges who are much more supportive to their cause. Mohsen, who was also a student organizer at Columbia, along with Mahmoud Khalil, whose court case is going well, I think, but who's still in prison.
Yes,
was moved to Vermont, and Judge Jeffrey Crawford, the district judge there, ordered him released today. He's been freed. He is a free man, and he compared the current wave of immigration detentions to the McCarthy era and the Red Scare, and called it and describing it as a period that the US should not be proud of. So I think, you know, it's good on all of these fronts to see the courts fighting back. And I have to say that with the earlier story we were discussing, the deportations to El Salvador, and Trump's deportation policy in general, we have been seeing a significant pushback from the courts. I mean, this is a battle for the balance of powers in the United States. If the courts crumble, then, you know, that will be extremely dangerous indeed. And that's what Trump intends. And it's not just him. What is behind him, of course, all of the people involved in implementing Project 2025, which is to, establish a dictatorial president and to remove anyone from any position of authority who can challenge that. And the balance between the executive and Congress and the courts is so essential to maintaining a balance within the United States that, like I say, if this battle were to be lost, then Trump may well achieve his aims. But I'm hoping and thinking in many ways that isn't going to happen. This has been a long-term project over decades, as people will know if they've looked at the courts. The Supreme Court, where justices are appointed for life, means that if you can get people in there who are from your side of politics, you get to have quite a large amount of control. And of course, we had the whole thing where Republicans blocked Merrick Garland from becoming a justice at the end of Obama's administration and put 3 right-wingers into the court in Trump's first term in office. But when it comes to Trump's outrageous evidence-free efforts to claim that he can send migrants to a prison from which there is no escape, the majority of the judges in the Supreme Court don't agree with him, and they've blocked him from sending people. This has all been happening in the last couple of weeks, and they can scream and shout all they want at the moment, but it is noticeable that a plane has not since then taken these hapless people to El Salvador. So I think we are seeing a significant pushback. But, this is just part of the story, isn't it? I mean, across the United States as a whole, the attack on what pillars of democracy there are and on this fragile balance of powers between the different parts of the government are under attack like never before. I mean, absolutely like never before.
Yep. Yeah. Andy, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. And I hope you'll come back. I'm sure I know this is just the beginning of what's going down. The executive order that Trump just signed on Monday gives greater latitude to the police department with immunity and worrying new rights that means the National Guard could come under his power, and then they could have allegiances through the Washington, D.C., not restricted to the governor. But this is a topic for another show.
I think it is, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there just seem to be new horrors emerging every day, don't there?
Yep. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. That was Andy Worthington, investigative journalist, authority on Guantanamo and the war on terror, in quotes, co-founder of Close Guantanamo. He continues to stand up for the few that are still held in Guantanamo, and I'm grateful for his efforts and all that he's done for the last 20 years. And that's all we have time for on Frontline Voices, a show that airs Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays at 12 noon with guests, investigative reporters, journalists, academics and scholars. Very grateful for you listening in, and I'll be with you soon. Thank you.
Looking at the shiny red track.